Hello, and welcome to the third episode on obscure vintage tech companies. Today we're going to be going over an extremely unknown company, that being Iowa Precision Robotics. If you remember my Androbot video, they were the owners of this robot here in the group photo at IPRC 84. This robot's name is Marvin. He's an especially odd-looking robot, seeming more like a blue crash dummy. His standout design is definitely what led me down this company's rabbit hole, and it's very interesting what I found. So let's start with the history. The company would be founded in 1982 by Dave Gossman, Matt Plagman, and Dan Knobloch as Iowa Precision Machine Limited. They would begin work on their first robot, Marvin, in the basement of a farm. Before even having a working prototype, they would advertise their machine in Robotics Age in September of that year for potential buyers. The name Marvin would stand for Motile Anthropomorphic Robot ? The robot would be at a starting price of $1,500, with a general set of schematics listed, and a crude drawing of a geometric robot on two wheels. By January of 1983, Marvin's schematics would be fleshed out to more finalized specs. It would also now have a purchasable option to interface with Apple II and TSR-80 computers. The price would increase by $5, alongside a $15 operator's manual now being available for purchase. The drawing would be replaced with a more fleshed out sketch, featuring smooth curves, jointed arms, and a four-wheel body. By March of 1983, the first photo look at Marvin would be unveiled, alongside the ability to pre-order the robot. This would keep a similar design to the previous sketch, but would have no signs of bendable arms or hands, despite being marketed as having them. This leads to it possibly being an advertising prop, or an earlier prototype before hands were decided on. At this point, the CPU would be unveiled, a Motorola 68000, a high-tech inclusion at the time. Additional support for infrared communication between Marvin and terminals and printers was also stated to be available soon. In September, the full schematics would be unveiled. Its arms would now claim to have 6 axes of movement, which could pick up objects up to 5 pounds. The company had now also officially changed its name to Iowa Precision Robotics Limited. In March of 1984, Marvin would make his first proper debut with his final design, now dubbed Marvin Mark I. This would be a slimmer chassis with proper rotating arms. He would be shown outside the company's offices on a sidewalk for the day, which managed to bring local attention to the company. By this point, the company would now have 13 employees working on the robots, with the first unit planned to be completed within the coming weeks. Let's discuss Marvin's articulation, as it's an extreme standout for the robots at the time. He's basically an animatronic with what he can move. First are his shoulders, which can rotate back and forth 135 degrees. They can also rotate outwards 105 degrees. His upper arm can twist 135 degrees as well, while his elbow can bend 115 degrees. His wrist can twist 90 degrees, and his gripper can open 2.5 inches. Either arm can be controlled independently and can hold up to 5 pounds. Just like Androbot, this weight was measured as a 6-pack of your favorite beverage. His neck can also rotate 180 degrees, and his waist can bend surprisingly 50 degrees forward. For what looks like a simple robot, its main feature is its flexibility. Pre-orders were beginning to ramp up around this time. 6 Marvins would be ordered by a prop supplier in Hollywood. NASA would purchase one as well. Multiple firms wanted to lease the robot for television commercials, and around this time, someone named Bill R. would tour the Milford office due to an interest in using the robot at Hellman Engineering as an automated traffic controller for a client. There, he would spot many parts for units ready to be assembled, with 2 seen in pictures mostly complete. By April, the robot would gain a voice input module to speak with. He would also be given a black painted variant, which Dan Knobloch would claim as a spooky, ominous variant for owners who wanted him as an attack robot. This variant would soon debut at the first International Personal Robot Congress and Exposition on April 13th. There he would be brought front and center for the first time to the robotics world alongside Androbot's Topo 2 and other contemporaries. By this point, the newer model would now have an asking price of $6,000. Back in Iowa, Dan would do a local interview discussing Marvin. Unlike other robotics companies who would skirt around the issue, he would note what Marvin, alongside other commercial robots, lacked in. They couldn't climb vertical surfaces, they couldn't understand or visualize what they're interacting with, and they needed precise inputs and instructions from the user of their surroundings and tasks, otherwise they'd fail them. He also noted that Marvin had no safety features. Are you going to run him into your TV set a couple of times? Would you let him loose in a room with your children? With your dog? Later referring to his uncontrollable grippers, I can just see him going up and ripping someone's kneecap off. In September of that year, Iowa's Governor Terry Branstad would sign a proclamation declaring September 30th through October 6th to be the Iowa High Tech Week. At the signing, Marvin would be there to hand him the paper. though noticeably his grippers were holding it a bit too tight to the page. By this point, the company had been reduced to 10 employees, but planned to expand to 25 within the next 6 months. By the end of the year, the robot's price had now jumped to $6,200. By 1985, however, things fell silent at the company for the first half of the year. Reporters tried to get updates with the company, but found their phone had been disconnected. In July, David Gossman managed to speak with press, saying, "We've just gone through a really critical period for cash flow." Most of the company's staff had been laid off. The company did claim to have successfully shipped a Marvin robot within that time frame though, and had 4 more coming up. A $400,000 deal had also been struck to keep the company afloat longer, which had already racked up previously over $250,000 just in development. It would be confirmed later that despite having 22 confirmed orders for Marvin, only 4 would be finished and shipped. The company would soon lead into bankruptcy and wouldn't speak publicly for a long while. David would continue to attend conferences with a spare Marvin unit, however, this being the first ever RESNA conference in 1985 going over rehabilitation technology, and then the International Conference on Robotics and Automation in 1986. At the 86 conference, he would take a friend with him, Kent Lachner, who was able to see that Marvin was significantly ahead of the other robots at the time. This led Kent to partnering with David at the company to continue on. By this point, they were now working in the back of an old school building with barely any money. Finally, later in 1987, an order would come in from a pizza restaurant in Rome looking for a robotic waitress. They would set a $5,500 down payment and plan to pay $22,000 total once the robot was shipped. Just as the company began to scramble for the order, another request would happen just a week later to build a robot designed for the handicapped, likely tipped from the attendance to RESNA just before. Both robots would begin production. The waitress robot would decide to be built off of a spare Marvin unit the company had, now meaning Marvin Mark II was in production. Marvin would now be set to stand 6 feet tall with bendable knees, alongside switching the voice module to speak Italian. Marvin would receive a new name, however, now going by Futura, who would begin debuting in magazines by 1988. Futura would shift their appearance to look more human-like, replacing the crash dummy-looking head with a black-haired mannequin. Kent Lachner would at the same time start a marketing company for IPR's robots called Ability Technologies Corp., now based in Melvin, Iowa. There, he would advertise Futura and their upcoming robot for the handicapped as robots for accessibility. This second robot, built further off of Futura, which technically makes it Marvin Mark III, would be called the PSR-1. This new robot would focus on helping handicapped individuals using telepresence, where a camera would be installed in the robot's head, allowing it to transmit what it's seeing back to the user while being in a completely different room. Its CPU would also be upgraded to an IBM-compatible personal computer. A year later, in February of 1990, the final update on the company would be recorded. Futura would finally be ready to ship to Italy by the next month, and a robot called Versa Base would also be seen at the company, which could dance. After this point, no more info on the company would surface, and it would later close in 1992. So that's our current story. What's the lost media in this episode? Well, first, it's most importantly Marvin himself. There is 0 footage of him moving, speaking, or performing any action. This episode is the first where the actual topic itself is the lost media rather than the history. PSR-1 and Futura are also a no-show. It's unclear if Futura ever did ship to Italy, and even then we never found out which restaurant ordered them. Alongside this, there's many Marvin-related things lost, that being his manual, his interface software, and a colored pamphlet that was given out to people who were interested in ordering. Sadly, all 3 founders would die in the 2000s to 2010s. David Gossman in 2009, Matthew Plagman in 2012, and Dan Knoblach at an unknown time before 2016. It's most likely that their work is long gone by this point. Unlike other episodes, there's not really much left to search outside of finding more images and articles. Since 4 Marvins did ship though, there's always a rare chance one might be sitting in a storage unit somewhere, but that's more of a waiting game. As always, everything here can be found on the Archive of Vintage Robotics and Technology Companies Wiki, alongside articles for previous and future episodes. I'd also like to thank my patrons listed here for their support in making this video. If you want to see behind the scenes on my archival projects, 3D art, and my video game min-max, consider supporting me for as low as $1 a month. Anyways, I'll see you next time.